Namo Buddhaya, Namo Amitabha. Hello everyone. So last time we talked about the first noble truth, how there is sufferings in life and the different types of sufferings. And in today's video, I feel like discussing with you the second noble truth, the cause of suffering. What exactly causes suffering? So sometimes people may think, oh, Buddhism seems to be quite pessimistic or negative, like it talks about how everything is suffering, etc. But that's not the whole picture yet. So yes, the Buddha told us about there is suffering in life objectively for us ordinary beings, but he also told us the cause of suffering and also told us how to end all sufferings in life. So in a way, Buddhism is actually quite positive. The Buddha told us how to end sufferings. All these practices in Buddhism can help us to end sufferings in life. So it's not negative at all. If anything, Buddhism is very real, very practical, and very pragmatic. So let's look at the second noble truth, the cause of suffering. What exactly causes the suffering? The Buddha told us our craving, our desire, or in other words, our attachment of tanha leads to suffering. So again, this is the truth not because the Buddha said so, but because it's actually the actual truth. You can experiment it whether the craving will lead you to suffering or not. And another thing that we need to emphasize here is that the tanha, the craving, this is different from the wholesome desires. For instance, the desire for awakening, the desire for practicing the Dharma, and the desire for being born in Amitabha Buddha's Pure Land to transcend the cycle of samsara, the cycle of reincarnation. So these wholesome desires are actually good for us, but not the craving, such as the craving for sensual pleasures, for sense objects that will bring us pleasures. For instance, we talked about before, for beings in the desire realms, we may be craving for money, lust, fame, food, and sleep. The craving for lust will lead to suffering due to impermanence. One may obtain pleasures, but these pleasures are very temporary. It's not permanent. And sensual pleasures can never really be satisfied all the time. So that is why the craving for lust, for sensual pleasures, will lead to suffering. And even also craving for food, for good food, if we eat too much, we actually do not feel good. So everything in moderation. If we don't want to suffer, then we really need to confine or manage our craving, manage our desire. Some people may say, I don't understand why Buddha wants us to give up senses. Actually, the Buddha doesn't tell us to give up senses. It's not possible to give up senses. We experience all kinds of senses every day. But it's really to give up our craving, our desire, our attachment to sensual pleasures. So this is different from giving up senses. Okay? And be very careful of some so-called practices that they tell you to explore your sexuality or sacred sexuality, neo tantra, and all this, which may increase your pleasures or your intimacy with your partner, but they will not lead to true awakening. They will not lead to awakening. They will not help you to liberate from all sufferings in life. Why? Because these practices increase the tanha, increase your craving for sensual pleasures, and because all is impermanent, if you try to be attached to grab hold of something that is just impermanent in nature, you are doomed to suffer. So this will not lead to awakening, will not lead to liberation. We need to have the wisdom to distinguish what kind of practices are the right practices. And the Buddha also talked about the craving for existence, the craving for our identity. This is also based on the false belief of the ego self. If you think you are this body is changing all the time, it's impermanent. Or your mind, your thoughts, they're also changing all the time. Or whatever identities you try to build in life, they also can be changed at any moment. All is impermanent here. So you cannot actually find a permanent, fixed self. And hence, the ego self is actually an illusion. We think that we are the body, we are this self, the egoistic self, and hence we want to be reborn again in the cycle of reincarnation. So some people may be like, oh, what's so bad about reincarnation? Sure, there is suffering, but there's also pleasures. If you keep being born in the cycle of reincarnation, then the suffering is just endless, like forever suffering. For the reason we talk about in the first Noble Truth, all these different types of sufferings, you will always experience the suffering of birth, old age, illness, death, and not getting what you want, but to be with people you dislike, and the sufferings of the 5 skandhas. So all these sufferings, you will forever experience them, just endless sufferings, if you desire to being born in the cycle of reincarnation. Now, this is different from if you desire to being born in Amitabha Buddha's Pure Land. Amitabha Buddha's Pure Land is different because it's created by the perfect enlightened mind of Amitabha Buddha and his great vows. When we are there, we will realize our true nature, will realize infinite light and infinite life. So the craving for existence is only talk about existence in the cycle of reincarnation. This is different from Amitabha Buddha's Pure Land, and we must understand that. Now, it's important to know that the 4 Noble Truths are only the truths in the Saha world, in the cycle of reincarnation. They do not apply in Amitabha Buddha's Pure Land. And to not be born in the cycle of reincarnation does not mean that one does not exist at all. The true nature of who we are is actually no birth and no death. And no birth and no death doesn't mean that there is no existence. Then one will fall into the wrong view of non-existence, but that's actually not like that. No birth and no death means that one transcends the suffering of birth and death. The Dharma body of the Buddha is actually everywhere. I do not think that Shakyamuni Buddha entered into parinirvana and he does not exist at all. This is the wrong view. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are actually everywhere. The Dharma body is everywhere, and they can manifest in countless incarnations in different worlds and different realms to help save sentient beings. It doesn't mean that they do not exist at all, but rather they transcend the suffering of birth and death. And they may even voluntarily come into this world to choose to be born into this world, but they will not subject to all the sufferings here. They may perform like an ordinary being to go through the suffering, but they have really transcended from all sufferings in life, and they're just here to help save sentient beings, like a performance. So do not think that if one attains enlightenment, then one does not exist at all. This is not the right view. And the third is the craving for non-existence. Sometimes people think, if to live is suffering, then death is liberation. And again, this is the wrong view, not the whole picture yet. If people doesn't understand what happened after death, then they may think, I will just commit suicide or self-annihilation, then that's the end of suffering. That's really wrong. So the body and the mind can actually exist independently. For instance, when you are sleeping in the evening, you do not actually feel your body, but the mind can be going everywhere and think of all kinds of things, creating all kinds of situations. So the Buddha also told us in the sutra, the mind does not abide in the body, nor the body abide in the mind. They can exist independently. And to get rid of the body does not mean that you will get rid of the suffering. So people who commit suicide maybe identify themselves with just the body. If the body is gone, then there is no suffering. That's not true. The mind consciousness still exists, and if you commit suicide, most likely that you will experience a much lower rebirth in your next life. The suffering will be even more. Because for people who commit suicide, they will experience a lot of pain at the time of death. And they carry this pain, the resonating karma for their next life will not be good. And also it's extremely rare and precious for us to obtain a human body in this life. So we should not waste this precious opportunity. We should really use this precious opportunity to practice the Dharma and to try to liberate from all sufferings in life, to Nianfo and to attain rebirth in Amitabha Buddha's Pure Land. So how can we reduce our attachment? To Nianfo is also a great way to help us reduce, to manage our attachment, to transform all this attachment to defilemental states, to the attachment to the name of Amitabha Buddha, which means infinite light and life. Now, one may say, but Nianfo is also an attachment. In a way, it's also a craving. But this is the wholesome desire, wholesome attachment, which resonates with our Buddha nature, and it will not lead to suffering. And there's no side effects. If anything, there's lots of positive benefits to Nianfo, and also to vow to be born in Amitabha Buddha's Pure Land, which is the easiest way to help us transcend the cycle of reincarnation. So in the next video, we'll talk more about how to end suffering and the Noble Eightfold Path. Namo Buddhaya, Namo Amitabhaya.